So Salesforce has been probably one of the most visibly involved companies in terms of local civic engagement from the tech community. I was wondering if you could, speak to, Mark Benioff's unique 1-1-1 model, and I just wanted to ask a question like, is there a problem with the way that the current tech startup culture approaches civic responsibility and service in San Francisco?
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. I think from my perspective, we have a great reputation in this area, largely because we've done the work for a really long time. We made it a core part of our startup process. So when we started the company, we said new technology model, new business model, new philanthropy model. So it was really baked into the original DNA of the company. And we've really attracted employees who were real leaders and had a real passion in this area. And I think it remains true today, even as the largest tech employer in the city. We continue to get great talent. I think that
can you maybe for the audience
Sure.
Can you explain the 1-1-1 model?
Yeah, so it's about giving 1% of your equity, which is pre-IPO stock. 1% of time. So today we have about 600,000 hours of community service that have been given by those great people I just talked about. And then the 1% of product. So 1% of our customers are nonprofit, 22,000 customers around the world. Mm-hmm. So that is what the 1-1-1 model is. We took the 1% equity part from eBay. They were leaders there. We learned a lot from Hasbro as it relates to the time component. And then there's been great leaders in the product area for many years, like Cisco and others. So we just kind of smashed all the best practices together as a really easy thing to remember when you start up.
Okay, and I know that like SF City and Ron Conway have been trying to get other companies to adopt the 1-1-1 model as well, and I've only seen I think Yelp's done it, but I don't know how many others have followed in their footsteps. Do we just have a lack of awareness, or is there something wrong with the way that we're approaching local engagement?
Well, I think that actually this is the third bubble now that I've been working at Salesforce.
Yeah.
2000, 2008, 7, 8, and then now it's the champagne is flowing, and I think this is the first time in the last 15 years that I've really seen actually a lot of momentum. People are talking about philanthropy. People are putting 1% aside. You talked about Yelp. We've seen Workday do it. Optimizely in the city is another startup that's done it. Get Active has done it. So I think that for the first time, I'm really starting to see it become part of the infrastructure, and that's what I was really looking for. So I'm an eternal optimist. I have hope that it will become the new model for the ways that companies are set up, whether they are tech companies or in other areas. So I think I'm seeing progress, actually, and I think that tech companies have a heightened awareness, and we have 2,000 of them now in San Francisco. Yeah. Certainly some could be doing more, but every company, no matter who you are, has people, has product, and has stock.
Okay, so Gabriel, she just said, are you an internal optimist? And she just said that, the champagne is flowing, but, I live in the Mission and I'm seeing all the changes happening here, and you've been there even longer. You were born there. What's happening with the long-standing Latino population in the Mission, and how are they being impacted by tech?
Yeah, thank you. This is a great cavernous, this is really cool. Yeah, so over the last 10 years, we've seen a 21% displacement of the Latino community from the Mission District, which, for the few of you that aren't from San Francisco, is like the traditional Latino dense district. So it's substantive change. We're still at about 38% density for the neighborhood, which is, just a great neighborhood of, just social change and activism. It's where Carlos Santana, came out with his music. It's where we have the Presida Mural Eyes. So I think what we're seeing is, San Francisco is almost at full employment. We're at 4.4% unemployment, but what we're seeing for communities of color, unfortunately, is we're not sharing in the wealth. And so for the Latino community, while it's 4.4 for the whole city, for the Latino community, it's about 12%. And for the African American community, it's about 17 in the Bayview. And you know, I know Google did a great thing by sharing a lot of its employment data about 95%, or at least 5% of their employees were Black and Latino, and that's a big concern for us. So Meta, just to give you a little bit more background about what we do, for 40 years we started as really economic development agency that really helped to grow the Mission neighborhood for small business entrepreneurs, filling storefronts, attracting businesses, and what we found is that the needs of the people that were trying to start business started changing with the first bubble in 2001. And a lot of Latino entrepreneurs that rely on us for cultural services, they were, saying, well, all of a sudden they didn't have access to credit anymore. And all of a sudden the rents for the commercial spaces were too expensive, so we started expanding our services to financial capability, and then we started expanding to workforce, and we expanded to tax preparation. So, I think if all the companies in tech did like Salesforce, I think there would be enough to address some of these problems that we're having with affordable housing and with investment in education, to help disadvantaged communities get these jobs.
There's this persistent question that sort of comes up that I hear from some of the activist community, and it kind of blew up earlier this week when we had two investors get into a bit of a catfight with each other. We had Ron Conway, who is he's called the godfather of Silicon Valley, and who was an angel invested in so many companies, including Google, over the years, and has been very, very involved with the mayor and city government for a while. And he got into a fight with another investor named Chamath Palihapitiya, who was early at Facebook, and had started a new fund called Social Plus Capital. And they got into a very heated argument a few days ago over whether Mayor Adley should resign. And Ron was more on the side of the 1-1-1 model and charity, and Chamath was talking about the notion of more taxes in order to pay for some of these services and public infrastructure. And so I'm just wondering, I'd love to hear from Suzanne, I'd love to hear from all of you, what's is it charity, is it taxes, what is it, what's the mix? What would work?
You want to start as a former city government?
Well, I guess, yeah, sure, I'll chime in. So I'm Melanie Nutter. I used to be the director of the San Francisco Department of the Environment, and we were and are a city agency that's charged with overseeing all of the sustainability programs for the city and county of San Francisco. And so I'm your resident greenie, so I'm wearing the hat today of thinking about carbon emissions and both short-term as well as long-term impacts of all the decisions that we're making today and how they're going to affect the environment and our communities in the long run, because you really can't divorce the two. And that's one point that I did want to make is really, when you think about reducing carbon emissions and thinking about protecting the environment, in the end, it is to make sure that our communities are safe and sustainable and resilient, and you really can't disconnect the two. In terms of your question, I'm not going to get in the middle of that debate by any means, but I think, from a macro perspective, what it really brought home to me when I watched it was, is what the city is doing today and the decisions that are being made by our decision makers enough to get us to where we need to be, to protect our communities, to bring enough affordable housing units online to protect the environment, or is there more that needs to be done? And I thought it was a really interesting debate of saying, yes, the mayor has said he wants to bring on 30,000 affordable housing units.
Build or preserve 30,000 units, 10,000 of which are affordable. I think that's the number. Those are the numbers, yeah.
Yeah. So my point is, from a macro perspective, the question really was, is that enough or does more need to be done? And I think it really illustrated that debate.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, I would just actually clarify that my view, it is not about charity. It is about sustainable, and I actually think that the Chamath has this thinking as well, as he's focused on sort of social businesses. So I think the mix between tax and, quote unquote charity, I don't know enough about the tax structure to be able to weigh in on that, but what I'll say on the charitable side is that we're focused on long-term solutions to problems. So it's why we're very focused right now in the schools and the next generation of leaders. It's why we're very focused on Europe, because in my view, you talked about the African Americans, the Latinos that are leaving the city. We are focused on providing jobs. I think that is one thing that tech companies can do.
How do you make sure that you're recruiting from like a really wide base?
Actually, we're recruiting from a very focused area. So when we gave our $2.5 million grant to Europe, we were looking at cohorts strictly from District 10, which is Bayview and Viz Valley. So we were looking at trying to kind of lift up cohorts of young people between the ages of 18 to 24. That's how we've been focused on trying to include that population in the growth of the city. So I just want to think beyond charity as you sort of typically think about it, because jobs are critical, scholarships, college are critical, working in education and education reform is also critical. It's kind of, you got to take the long view versus the short view in my experience.
I'm just really pleased to hear that. And that's actually what I think has been the changing definition of economic development. Because when Meta started as an economic development agency, mission economic development agency, people thought it was just attracting business and filling storefronts. But actually it's investing in people. That's the economic development. And to hear Salesforce think about that, investing in the education, the long term, that is what economic development is for us, with our tax preparation, with our financial capability, with our workforce, with our homeownership counseling. Because that's really what it takes. Because when you are able to hire somebody locally, and you're able to draw from, people that you've cultivated through education, through health, through other means, you're able to, have that one of those externalities that is almost not measured, but I think the sharing economy has tried to commoditize, which is, social capital. And that's like me meeting you and me meeting you, and now I have a little credit with you, right? So you'll loan me $5 and, because you've met me. But that's basically those unknown bonds that you really are able to keep by hiring someone local. You're not having to draw someone in that has to rent a new apartment. They're already there. And they already have those connections, and you can just get a deeper perspective.
You brought up those terrible numbers from Google earlier. What can tech companies in San Francisco do to make sure that the jobs, the high-skilled jobs that they're creating, are not only just attracting people with high levels of education from around the country and the world, but also benefiting people directly who have long-term residents of the neighborhoods like the Mission and Bayview. There's some programs that you started already, but realistically, you've got to make investments at multiple ages and education levels. And what would that look like, or what would an ideal involvement from a tech company look like?
So our model is the Mission Promise Neighborhood, which is President Obama's initiative based on the Harlem Children's Zone. And just to put it very simply, it is every family succeeds, every student achieves. And so what our model is, it's family economic success. So making sure the parents have stable housing, making sure they have living wage jobs, making sure everyone has a medical home, and that students able to achieve better academically, and they're able to go to Lowell, like I was fortunate to go to, or other people, Galileo, which the other public schools that have kind of some tech hubs. I mean, it's that investment in families and in youth, so that San Francisco this is why I think a lot of us live here. It's got some of the smartest people in the world, and some of us have been around and noticed that and come back. And I think if we cultivate that across the broad population, through education, through the job training programs, through financial capability, I think that's how you do it. It's a long-term strategy, and unfortunately, the public schools have not invested in that. But I think, because they've been underfunded, frankly. But I think if private capital does make the investments, I think it does go a long way. It has a multiplier effect.
So the limited time that we have left, I have to ask about housing, because the San Francisco Bay Area is expected to grow from somewhere 7 million to 9 million people, I think, over the next 20 or 30 years. And those people have to go they'd have to go somewhere. But San Francisco is surrounded on 3 sides by water, and we're having like as many other landlocked, desirable places face, we have a lot of challenges over where to put those homes. So I'd love to hear from, Melanie and Gabriel again, where do we put people?
So where do we put people and all of the folks that are coming to San Francisco? I'll start with the long view. And I think that one of the critical issues that we are looking at but need to continue to look at is around climate mitigation as well as adaptation. Because as you mentioned, and as all of you know, we are on a peninsula surrounded by water on 3 sides, and that means that our community already has and will face sea level rise, additional flooding, other impacts like high heat days. There was a new report that just came out from the IPCC that said there could be a 1 meter sea level rise by 2100 in San Francisco. What that would essentially do is flood portions of our financial district as well as some of our high priority development areas. So you have some of our near-term highest priority development areas that are planned for housing as well as other commercial development in some of the most high-risk areas in about 100 years or less than that. So, the first point that I would make is we need to deal with the immediate, but we don't want to solve our problems in the short term to trade them for long-term issues, where then we'd have a community that's suffering. And one other thing that I'll mention, since we have been talking about ensuring that equal access to housing, to services, to health, some of these high priority development areas that have some of our underserved communities in San Francisco are the areas that are most likely to flood, the areas that are most likely to suffer from high heat days. And so these are things that we want to do, again, not just for the environment, but also for our communities for the short term and the long term.
I'm just wondering, so there's, if I put on my San Francisco Bay Area hat as a long-term resident, I'm like, oh, of course we want more awesome people of more awesome different backgrounds coming and jamming in the awesome city that's San Francisco. But then from a federal perspective, or from when I not only just think about climate change, but also tech in general, the limitations of the barrier, actually forcing spillovers into other cities around the country. So Los Angeles is having a very interesting moment as a startup scene, and so is Seattle, and so is Austin, and so is New York. And so it's actually, I just wonder, if we can't, if we're at all this risk for climate, should we be even having more people here, or should we just, from a federal perspective, should we be encouraging them to move to different cities instead?
Well, just to pick up on a conversation we were having a little bit earlier, I really do think it does come to transit-oriented development, where you're looking at basing your affordable housing, your services, your jobs around the transportation system. And that takes us into a whole nother discussion around the transportation system that we have in San Francisco, where in certain areas it's functioning, in other areas it's not. And there are portions of our city that are growing rapidly and are really under pressure with this increased population growth and increase in the economy and the job sector, but there are other portions that are not. I live on the west side of town, and somebody asked me, are you seeing the influx of people who are coming to San Francisco from the tech community on the west side of town? And you don't really see it because we don't have a train. We have a bus that takes a really long time to get out there. And so, when you take a step back and think about where and how are we growing as an entire city, both for the short term and long term, I think that there are answers. I don't have them, but I think that there are answers that hopefully the city and the community will continue to explore.
Last question for Gabriel. So where do we put people? People are obviously moving into the mission, and it's changing the character of the neighborhood substantially. And then there's a lot of developments that are proposed around, what's the mix? How do we do it?
Well, I think the mayor and the city have prioritized making sure that we do infill development at public sites and fast track affordable housing at those sites. Going what Melanie said, we have to also prioritize dense housing around transit hubs for transit-oriented development. We're going to have some funding come online from Cap and Trade that could potentially build 15,000 affordable units in California with a $10 billion investment. And but I think what's important to keep in mind for transit-oriented development, because you can really copy Seattle's policy with that, and that's basically transit-oriented development needs to be prioritized for low-income communities because they have a higher propensity to use transit. And if you really want to take 105 million greenhouse gases out of the air of California, you want to prioritize transit-oriented development for low-income communities because they need the nexus of services. They need that transit. They're you know, a high income at those properties, like at 16th and Mission, would double the likelihood that the person that lives there would have a car.
Well, I want to thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.